Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and today it's just me because I am highlighting previous guests in today's episode, specifically United States veterans, and all of this is in honor and recognition of Veterans Day. What I wanted to do for y'all was present y'all some veterans, share a little bit about their stories, some great information and advice from those stories from those previous episodes. And hopefully, if you're interested, you can go back and check out those episodes. I'll have them in the description below. And for any of the newer episodes, which are available on YouTube, I'll have them in the upper corner here as well for y'all. And if you are watching on YouTube, what I'll have is the picture of the guest with some information. So if you're just listening, feel free to check out the YouTube as well for some more information. But yeah, I want to highlight some of the veterans who have been on the show who I felt like those episodes were really powerful, really awesome episodes. I enjoy them personally. I've listened to all my own episodes about 3 or 4 times. So these ones, especially, in fact, a lot of these, the first half of these are going to be from over a year and a half ago, before I was on YouTube, before I had professional equipment, before I was really in a place where I was a good host. So it is a bit of a throwback Thursday today, even though it's Monday, Veterans Day. But yeah, we're going to get right into it with JT Money, is what he decided to call himself for my show. You can find JT online. He is the president and CEO of the Marine Corps Scout Sniper Rifle Association. It's a nonprofit and it helps bring together those who are sniper riflemen in the United States Marine. They get together and kind of have that same connection that they had while they were in the service. There's not a lot of opportunities for rifle snipering outside of the Marines, other than some very specific jobs or if you're going hunting. But this organization allows the guys and gals who did that in the service to get together to help one another out. It's more than just shooting guns together. It really is about helping one another and making connections and keeping that brotherhood and sisterhood alive after you leave the service. And that's what we touch upon in the episode, really, is leaving the service. JT shares with us his story of identity. He struggled a lot with his identity and transitioning out, and we talk about that. Among that episode, we also highlight some cool facts about sniper rifles, about how far you can shoot people, and he shares a story about one of his missions that is just mind-blowing, that really changed his perspective on life and how we interact with people during wartime or combat situations. And it's definitely something for us to think about. JT ends the episode on a very heartfelt note, and that was what I like to do as well, and that other guests have done. And I see it especially among my military members who come on the show. He offers for you to reach out to him if you are one of those active duty military members or veterans who is going through a rough patch, whether that's a long one or a small one, especially if you're feeling suicidal. He wants you to know that he's there for you. I'm there for you. And I think it was a great way to end the episode, that sense of brotherhood and sisterhood that we were talking about throughout the whole time, that you can find outside of military service, but it takes a little bit. And we talk about the role that career and life, balancing them and separating them, plays when it comes to identity, and the difficulty of the military being a career that is also your lifestyle. From that, we get into a much more lighthearted episode. Our next military episode is with Chris. And this episode it's funny, it's frustrating. It's called Some Good Old Military Shenanigans because, it's about a bunch of, soldiers. You leave them out in a field. What happens? There's a story of a 5 pound can of pudding, and I'm not going to say anything further on that because I don't want to spoil it. But we get into the relationship drama, cheating wives, cheating husbands, a lot of cheating wives. We really get into the military spousal stories, uh, that we've heard, that we've experienced. We get into some really bad horror stories of what happens when you come back from deployment. And also just Chris's tale of how his first son was born and why you should never leave your glasses at home and why you should always wear them, especially when you're out drinking. But yeah, I won't say more than that. We end the episode with Chris's proposal for a new societal and economic structure in the mission he's on to help change the world. So, if either of those interest you, I highly recommend you check out the episode. It's funny if you're a military member because you can relate to the stories. And if you're not a military member, I highly encourage you to listen to it because what you're going to hear might be unbelievable to you. And yeah, it's definitely an interesting story. After that, one of my favorite episodes of all time, Raul Herrera, Swiftboat Vietnam veteran. This episode was a favorite of mine because it highlights the naval involvement of Vietnam. When we talk about Vietnam, we often get into this mindset that it was humping the boonies, exploring the jungle, and we focus so much on that. Yes, that was a huge part of it. Don't get me wrong. That was a majority of it. The guerrilla warfare was, and we'll get into that in a different episode, the guerrilla warfare and the jungle life. But in this episode, we went to the ocean and found out what was the Navy doing, what was the Coast Guard doing, because they were involved in it. Raul Herrera tells a heart-wrenching story, really, of what happens when you celebrate too early during war and combat zones. He talks about the reality of Vietnam, but we have a great fun time as well. It's a pretty lighthearted episode for a majority of it. We're talking about Hispanic culture and Mexican food and, just funny stories about how you can say yes to one thing in the Navy and it actually means you're saying yes to a bunch of other things you didn't sign up for. And we get into, the PTSD kind of conversation with Vietnam veterans and how that conversation wasn't happening until 40 years afterward. And we get into what happens when you bottle up your emotions and how many untold stories there are from Vietnam, untold stories of soldiers and sailors who passed away without the chance to tell the story and no one to tell it for them. But Raul Herrera is here and he's telling the story of him and his crew and the ones who were lost that weren't able to tell their story. He's telling it for them so that people know what they did and so that their sacrifice is appreciated. And we ended with that, and it was really powerful. I really felt it when he talked about what happened to him and his crew of just six people on a little boat, a little swift boat that could fit only six people out there fighting against warships. So it's a great episode, a phenomenal story, and again, unreal. It doesn't seem real, which I'll say again when we get to the other Vietnam episode, but it's like watching a movie. You think it's fiction what these Vietnam veterans are telling you about and describing. It just does not seem real. We're so disconnected from it, especially the younger generations. It just seems so fictional. So if you haven't read a piece of Vietnam literature, or sat down and had a conversation with a Vietnam veteran, I really recommend it because I can tell you they're one of my favorite types of people to talk to because it's entertaining, it's educational, it's informative, and it's really sad how they were treated, which we'll get into in the other Vietnam episode I keep referencing. Moving on, we have Skylar Robertson, self-defense witness expert. He is a guy you call into court when there's a case of self-defense and they need an expert to say whether it was or was not self-defense. And that's how we spend the second half of the episode talking about the tragic reality of how self-defense has become villainized, how the courts have become corrupt, police officers have become corrupt, and we go over some of those cases in detail, talking about how dangerous it is. But Mr. Robertson gives us great advice on how to respond and how to act if you have shot someone in self-defense. He gives you the exact guide of what to say if you've been in the situation and your immediate actions afterward to ensure that you are legally protected in the safest way possible.
But the big thing, like I always tell people, is if you're in a self-defense situation, when the police show up and they go, "What happened?" You say, "This person tried to kill me." And when they go, "Well, how did he get shot?" Don't say, "I shot him," because that's an admission. Say, "Officer, I will cooperate fully with your investigation after I've spoken to my attorney," and then stop talking. Don't admit to anything. Don't say anything.
So
And don't
that's a big
say,
takeaway here.
yeah, don't say, "Well, can I have an attorney or should I get an attorney?" Say, "I want an attorney." Clearly say you want an attorney and stop talking.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen,
And
that's your advice right there. Listen to that.
Out of all the pieces of information on my show, what he advises when it comes to immediate actions and words for self-defense incidents is super important now more than ever, where self-defense is being villainized. People are being arrested, framed, and put in jail in a time where America is being thrown into this war against firearms, and criminals are almost being praised or let go, even though they've done awful things. It is dangerous to wield a firearm in self-defense. We are seeing men and women who defend their homes, their property, against someone trying to kill them or rape them. We are seeing them thrown in jail instead. So please, his advice is great, and well, definitely reach out to him and get more information if that's something that you think about or you think will be an important part of your life. Before we got into all that stuff that was really honestly aggravating to hear in the sense that the justice system is failing so many people. We were talking about some funny stories from his time working as a private contractor over in the Middle East and some of his military service, some super funny stories, as well as just some great advice and military stuff going on. And also just his tales from working kind of for the military, but not for the military after he got out and he went over to the Middle East. That's a great episode and a great time. After that episode, we get into Robin Bartlett leading a platoon in Vietnam that is just 20 years of age. And it is, like I said earlier, seemingly fictional. When I read that book, I just couldn't believe that this was true. I mean, he has no reason to lie. He tells his Vietnam story, and he told about how he got desensitized to death, to injury. He tells, and the characters he served with, you would think are from a movie. I mean, some of the characters in his book you're reading, you're like, there's no way this is a real person. This is such a cliche person. But the entertainment industry is drawn from reality in some aspects, and it, is true. And I think it's so interesting. You look at it and you're reading a book about basically high schoolers or just out of high school. You read about these people, these kids really leading platoons and being armed and sent into war, and kind of how they cope with it, how it affects them mentally, how they try to take care of one another, how they have to leave one another, how they watch each other die. I mean, again, if you've never read a piece of Vietnam literature, because Vietnam did happen, it's real, you know, it's just mind blowing. So I highly recommend it. Again, that episode is all in the interior of the jungle. It is definitely in the heart of the jungle. The book goes deeply into that. That's a majority of the book. And it is just so amazing to me, just so interesting, just so mind blowing that episode and the other Vietnam episodes I had. And we ended it with a very serious message. I asked Mr. Bartlett if you could leave us with one thing, what would it be? And he said this: if you see a Vietnam veteran, don't say thank you for your service. Say welcome home. And he shared his experience and the experience of many Vietnam veterans who weren't welcomed home. They were hated, they were shunned, they were disgraced. It was tragic. Most Vietnam veterans didn't even want to fight. They were forced to go. And then when they came home after losing everyone, after losing themselves internally, They lost everyone back home, and it's a shame. It angers and upsets me that that's how we treated them. I think regardless of the situation, regardless of whether you support the war or not, that is no excuse to disrespect and mistreat those soldiers and sailors and airmen and women who come home and went through things that you couldn't even imagine. So, a great respect to the Vietnam veterans. Then we get into the modern day again with David Nathanson, and he was in the military for over 30 years. And that blows my mind. That's a long, this is a long time. And he would have been in for life if it wasn't for what happened to him, which is part of the episode. We talk about the leaking of politics into the military. The military being a, government owned and run kind of organization, it's inevitable that political incidents and political drama will affect the military. It happens. However, things can really screw over something for one person or a group of people, and David Nathanson was one of those cases. I won't tell his story for him. You can check it out in the episode, but we get into the unfortunate aspect of that and the recovery from that. The whole episode in general was about leadership and change. One of the great things he said is that, yes, we need change in the military, but too much change causes instability. And the military needs to be strategic about what changes they focus on and implement. And I agree with him. Unfortunately, we see the military focus on a lot of the wrong changes, not the right changes. That being said, we get into leadership, having been in for 30 years and having been, you know, through all of that, through several different types of leadership positions himself, as well as having several different types of leaders. David Nathanson really goes over the good and the bad of leadership that he experienced in over 30 years. And then he also shares with us what he's doing now. And it was a great episode. I really enjoyed it. It was a genuine conversation, and it was a difficult conversation when it came to the political nonsense that has affected so many military members and when it came to some of the bad leadership. But it's a hopeful episode as well. Mr. Nathanson really highlights good leadership and how you can be a good leader in the military. From there, we get into an episode with the man who calls himself Kenshin Ra. The reason I highlight this episode is because it goes over VA neglect, specifically the turning of veterans into pill addicts or alcoholics because of the VA's neglect. Now, I say that with the statement that the VA has changed since then in some regards. It's not necessarily too much better, but Kenshin came specifically from the generation of soldiers and sailors where PTSD was just beginning to come up as a conversation, as a word. But he shares the fact that when he went to the VA, he could pick out any medications he wanted and they would just be given to him. And he became a pill addict and he lost everything. And he shares that tragic reality with us. And we see it happening nowadays still with pill form medication. We see it happening with other prescriptions that are more smoking based. And we see a lot of just numbingness. We see a lot of symptom treatment, not a lot of cause treatment. That's both civilian side and military side. But that episode really focuses on the VA and what they were doing at the time, some of the issues going on still today with it. And so it's a very sad tale. He also talks a little bit about his PTSD experiences as a Mormon and kind of what happened when he went back home. From there, right at the beginning of season 3, we have Douglas Brinker. Douglas Brinker is one of the best guests I've had, one of my favorite episodes. It starts off very lighthearted. It's a really funny episode. It's a great time. Douglas is reminiscing about his sailing days, and there's great time. Then we get into how he killed himself twice. He took his own life twice, and he was brought back both times. And now he is working for the same people who saved his life to pay it forward. The episode is about suicide in active duty in veteran communities, the prevention of it, the awareness of it, and the reality of it. So it's one of my funniest episodes as well as one of my darkest episodes. I highly recommend that if you're going to listen to any episode out of all of these. That one has always been near and dear to my heart because it was a great time and a serious time. And we had a really good discussion on, the reality of it and how Mr. Brinker is now working as a beacon for hope to help other people if he can prevent just one person. And he shares a little bit about his book that'll be coming out and what he's doing nowadays and what we can do and the reality of what happens when we take our life and all the people left behind and that we affect and these staggering numbers that we're seeing when it comes to active duty and veteran suicide. And we even share some stats about how it's affecting women in the military now, as well as female veterans, and how the suicide tactics are changing. So that's an important episode. Again, it starts off really funny. We have a lot of great stories that Mr. Brinker shares about his time in the Navy. And it just highlights life in general as being a mixture of some really great times and some really bad times. We got to be able to live with both and how we can maximize the good times and minimize the bad times. From there, it's EJ Snyder, EJ Skull Crusher Snyder to all the fans out there. 6 times Naked and Afraid champion, America's number one ranked survivalist. Awesome dude. Huge, monstrous, scary dude. Killed an alligator while naked. I mean, I don't know what more to say about it. Throws axes, climb mountains. He's in like his 60s or 70s too, on top of it. And he's in great shape and he is a scary looking dude. But if you listen to that episode, you'll find out that he's one of the nicest guys out there. He is a gentle giant. He is caring. He is funny. He is a great dude. He is a real man. And we talk about men supporting men, being there for one another. We talk about Naked and Afraid. We talk about he served over 20 years, and we talk about him doing survival training, and it's just such a good episode. It's fun. The Naked and Afraid stories are a great time, and I won't spoil too much, but if you're gonna check it out, I encourage it because he received a certain type of medical injury that is just, if you're a man, you would never want that kind of medical injury. And the way he took care of it, he's EJ Skull Crusher Snyder, or as he says, EJ effing Snyder. So it's a great time. He's a great dude, and you should definitely check it out. And if you like survival stuff, he's America's number one ranked survivalist, capable of living with nothing but items from your garbage can. So be sure to check that out if you like that kind of stuff. Or go watch Naked and Afraid and then go check out that episode and just see the contrast between Naked and Afraid EJ and podcasting EJ. But he, like I said, he's a great guy. We get to Jason R. Thomas in that episode, and that is a great episode. It's one of my longest episodes, but Jason R. Thomas is a nuke. So we get a whole bunch of nuke power, which hasn't been a joke or on the show for a long time. It was great to sit down with another nuclear operator, and he tells us it's just a great time. Again, I had a great time talking to a fellow nuke. The show was actually a couple of nukes hanging out together. So that's why it's my favorite episode because it was a couple of nukes on Couple of Nukes. But what we talked about in that episode was leadership, military leadership, and just tales of the nuclear community And yeah, it's just a great time. If you're a nuclear operator, it's especially fun. And if you're not a nuclear operator, you get a little insight into the wacky community of nuclear operators, which is the reason the show was even started in the first place. And if you're wondering why the show isn't a couple of nukes anymore, check out the episode A Couple of Nukes Died, Now What? Because I go over where the show started, how it started, what it was supposed to be, and where we are now. And where we are now in our list of episodes is the modern day resources and battle when it comes to military suicide. That was with Scott DeLuzio back in September. He and I sat down together to tackle National Suicide Prevention and Awareness Week in the military sense. What was so haunting about that episode is the fact that all the suicides I mentioned were before deployment, and all the suicides he mentions are after deployment. It's interesting because you some people think that during the mission or during deployment, especially on a ship in the Navy, is when suicides would happen. But interestingly enough, it was the dread of what was to come or the unknown, or it was the regret and processing and PTSD afterward. And Scott gets real with us. He shares how unreal it was that he and the people he deployed with made it out of a combat zone where people were actively trying to kill them. And then years later, the people we served with took their lives. And again, we don't know exactly why, how related to the military it was. But we use that episode as a way to break down the reality of active duty suicide, especially. We've addressed veteran suicide quite a bit, and we do touch upon that. And we do share a bunch of good information and resources for that. But really, we focus on the active duty and what can you do to proactively prevent suicide within yourself and the people around you by taking advantage of the resources and opportunities you have in the military and outside of it. That was actually my most shared and sent to other people episode. I really appreciate everyone who shared that because that's what the episode was meant to be, a trove of resources for military members and their families to look at different ways to help better the lives of those who are active duty and veterans, both in the sense of community and then in just your self journey and what you can do. So I highly encourage y'all to share that episode. Definitely give it a listen, but I really appreciate y'all sharing that episode as a trove of resources for people to look into. From there, we move on to Richard Walsh. He was a Marine. In fact, he shot down jets with a rocket. That's pretty cool. But as he shares with us, there weren't a lot of jobs hiring after that. So we get into the transition into the civilian world in this episode. And he did great, actually. He became a very successful business owner. He was a steel sculptor and, water feature creator. However, he made some choices, and when the economy crashed, so did he. And he talks about rebuilding himself from that. He talks about the balance and importance of family and work. That is a huge lesson in that episode, which is family or business, or specifically the balance of business, where we talk about being a workaholic, letting the business consume your life, everything you do. We talk about financial planning and decisions. And then he shares what he's doing nowadays. We talk about physical fitness, the mindsets and attitudes of people in the gym, which is accompanied by a very funny story, one of my favorite stories on the show, of a guy who goes up to Richard Walsh while he's boxing and tells him he needs to quiet down. So I'll leave it at that. It's a great story. And we get into how he trains his son for Marine boot camp, and he's actually supposed to come back on the show to share military stories and tales from his time as a Marine. So I'm excited for his return. But definitely check out that episode if you're just interested in hearing anything that I mentioned there. It's a great episode. I really did like it. He's a great guy. He's one of the best guys I met, and it's an important lesson. From there, it's Thomas LeGrave, and he is also one of my most popular episodes. It was his first time ever podcasting, so shout out to him. He did an amazing job for a first time ever podcasting. He came on my show, super gracious for the opportunity, and we sat down and we talked about how he was a Navy SEAL who lost everything, got caught with drug use, and he was removed from the Navy SEALs. The episode starts off with emphasizing how if y'all don't know anything about the Navy SEALs, if you know that getting removed from them from drug use is such a huge opportunity blown. It is such a huge disgrace. And we talk about that. And we talk about why military members use drugs and get kicked out because it's something that happens every single day. The number one way I saw people leaving the Navy when I was in was because of drug use. And why? Many of them, not all of them, but many of them related it back and justified it to mental health and a lack of mental health mentorship. So Thomas LeGrave and I sat down and we talked about mentoring young adults, about recovering from addiction, about the Navy SEALs. It's a very powerful episode. It really is. If you are someone with an opportunity or doing something, I want you to take a step back and really look at it. I know we get caught up in our lives where we're like, it's just another Monday or whatever it may be. Maybe that's what Thomas LeGrave said to himself. But if we take a step back and actually look at, I'm a Navy SEAL or I'm whatever it is you're doing, how many people can actually do this? How many people have the honor or the abilities to do what I'm doing right now? Now, how hard did I work to get here? And is it worth throwing away? So I highly encourage everyone to just reflect on that with that episode in mind. An informative episode follows shortly afterward with Amelia Meisenheimer. That is all about the VA loan. So while Amelia is not a military member herself, she is a military spouse, and she shares about moving. I believe they moved pretty much right after she got married. She had to move. She's moved a ton of times, and she saw people using the VA loan in a way that they had the mindset, as I share on the show, they had the mindset that because I have it, I have to use it. And then they ended up getting stuck with a home or not getting the best deal they could have. So Amelia and I sit down to do some VA loan myth busting, talk about what we need to know and what she can do to help us. She has a ton of great resources and a complete guide on using the VA loan. And it's an informative episode if you are a military member or a spouse and you are looking at using the VA loan or want to get more information about it. It is a lighthearted and easygoing conversation that covers a ton of information and definitely is a great entryway into the world of the VA loan. And then lastly, ladies and gentlemen, to wrap up this Veterans Day episode for 2024, we have Darlene Green, retired naval commander. And, it was a great episode because she talked about being a woman in the Navy, being an officer, about the program she was able to create to help the mental health of members and their wives and husbands. And we talk about the importance of mental health, of understanding, of getting people to share and open up. And then we spend the rest of the episode talking about Darlene's current work with reversing aging and miraculous biology. It's a great episode, especially if you're someone dealing with a lot of medical health issues. She offers a non-invasive, innovative way to get your body to heal itself through the miraculous biology that all humans have. And so that episode, I believe it's the episode right before this one. So that is the latest and last military member on the show that I want to highlight. I thank y'all for listening to this episode. I know it wasn't the usual, and it's can become a monotone rambling of me just telling you to check out my own episodes. But I really did want to highlight the veterans who have been on the show and hopefully connect y'all with one of them. Hopefully, I inspired you to check out one or more of those episodes, and you can connect with a great guest and access some amazing resources, whether that's for suicide prevention, whether that is for community, whether that is for business or life. Because everyone I mentioned just now, not only are they all veterans, but they're all running their own businesses and programs nowadays as well, whether that's their nonprofits or something they can do for you. I just would love for you to check out those episodes or at least a guess and see what's going on with them. But ladies and gentlemen, I ask you finally one last thing to reflect on Veterans Day. And we live in a time right now where the military, where veterans aren't being respected properly, not treated properly, not recognized properly. So if you see a veteran today, thank them for their service. If they're a Vietnam veteran, welcome them home. And be sure to check on your active duty friends and family as well. But God bless y'all and thank you for listening to this episode.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide, through the waves we ride, jokes and laughter fill the air. On this voyage we have to share, working together, side by side, as one family we will abide. In the heart of the ship we reside, nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission a source of great pride.